Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling, The Persecution of an American Whistleblower. This is from the prologue. Where am I? How did I get here? Those are the kinds of thoughts you have when your ultimate nightmare comes true. It was January 26th, 2015, my second long day of waiting in a small, windowless, soundless conference room just outside the courtroom number 5 on the 4th floor of the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Over the past 2 weeks, I had been on trial, accused of violating the century-old Espionage Act. As an undercover officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, I'd been involved in Operation Merlin, a covert scheme to derail the Iranian effort to build a nuclear bomb by providing their scientists with fake, flawed blueprints for warheads channeled through a Russian scientist. Operation Merlin had ultimately backfired when the Iranian experts detected the fraud, as revealed in the book State of War by reporter James Risen. Agency leaders were furious, not at themselves for launching a risky and ill-conceived scheme, but at the author who dared to expose their incompetence. In their eagerness to punish someone for their embarrassment, they looked around for a scapegoat. They found me. A compliant U.S. attorney dutifully filed an indictment charging me with, quote, unlawful retention and unauthorized disclosure of national defense information, mail fraud, unauthorized conveyance of government property, and obstruction of justice, end quote. 9 criminal charges in all, based on the claim that I'd supposedly leaked classified information about Operation Merlin to James Risen. The truth is that I did not leak any classified information related to CIA operations to James Risen or to anyone else. But I am a whistleblower. I'd blown the whistle by suing the CIA for discriminating against me when I was an employee there. I'd also attempted to blow the whistle about the dangers of Operation Merlin, not by leaking, but by submitting my warnings to staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sadly, those warnings were ignored. I'd been forced to accept some disheartening truths, that neither blatant discrimination nor a dangerous operation related to weapons of mass destruction were matters of real concern to the powers that be at the agency or among the members of Congress charged with oversight of intelligence matters. Even before the trial had begun, I'd known that my prospects weren't good. The world had witnessed the cases of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, John Kiriakou, and a series of other whistleblowers whose prosecution, some said persecution, had been pursued by President Barack Obama with an eagerness that almost suggested a personal vendetta. In the atmosphere created by these cases, the mere accusation of having leaked classified information was enough to automatically condemn someone. In refusing to plead guilty and instead insisting on my right to go to trial, I knew I was facing an uphill battle, but I could not and would not confess to something I did not do. During the trial, the government did not present a shred of hard evidence to validate the charges against me. Even Judge Leonie Brinkman summarized the case against me as being based on, quote, very powerful circumstantial evidence, end quote, rather than on hard proof. But there was one incriminating fact about which there could be no doubt. The CIA had paraded a whole host of current and former agents in front of the jury, and I didn't look like any of them. I was a black man who dared to build a career serving my country as an officer of the CIA. The trial had lasted a week and a half. Now I was enduring the most excruciating part of the whole ordeal, waiting for a verdict. How the hell did it all come to this? I'd grown up as a true believer in the American dream. Work hard, do your duty, stand up for yourself. Those are the rules of the game, or so I'd been taught. I knew I'd done nothing wrong, and I knew that fighting against wrongs is what an American hero is supposed to do. That's all I knew how to do. That's why I was now clinging to hope and continuing to fight, unable to comprehend how defending my rights could somehow get me branded a traitor. Thankfully, I wasn't alone in that waiting room. My wife, Holly, and my attorneys, Ed McMahon and Barry J. Pollock, were there beside me. But having company...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Monday! Happy Halloween week. Indeed, it's going to be an interesting week. Actually, to start out on not such a happy note, Congressman John Conyers passed away. or former Congressman John Conyers. He was 90 years old. I just wanted to acknowledge him. He was just an extraordinary man. He was also a good friend of Tim Carpenter's, who is the founder of Progressive Democrats of America, and I was on their board for years. And Conyers, back in April of 2014, came to a PDA meeting and gave a talk. He was a regular guest on this program. He came on often, particularly to talk about his Medicare for All plan, which he repeatedly introduced into the House of Representatives. Just a good guy, John Conyers. So just wanted to start with that. Secondly, Elizabeth Warren has taken on education in a big way. She wants to quadruple federal Title I funding to schools with high proportions of students from low-income families. Now, why would that be? Because we pay for schools in the United States with a property tax. And property taxes in low-income neighborhoods are crappy, and, you know, they're very little money, and so the schools aren't good. Schools in high-income neighborhoods really, really do well. And so let's bring them up, right? This would change the funding formula. She wants to invest in school buildings, which are all too often crumbling. Basically, since the Reagan tax cuts, we stopped putting money into infrastructure like that. Another point is that she says that our schools, because our schools are funded the property tax way, because of all this, poor schools in poor neighborhoods, good schools in good neighborhoods, what happens is that where there's good schools, property values start going up. As property values go up, lower income people get pushed out, and including minorities. Her actual statement, modern residential segregation is driven at least in part by income inequality and parents seeking out the best possible school districts for their children. By investing more money in all our public schools and helping ensure that every public school is a great one, my plan will address one of the key drivers of residential segregation. She's calling for canceling student lunch debt and calling for free school breakfasts and lunches. I don't know if you saw the study over the weekend, I think it was in the Washington Post, that regardless of income, regardless of school district, those schools that have free school lunches, the kids perform better. It's just a remarkable study. And stopping the teaching to the test, pay our teachers better. She says to keep our traditional school systems strong, we must resist efforts to divert public funds out of traditional public schools. She wants a ban on for-profit charter schools. She wants the existing charter schools to have the same oversight and transparency as public schools. Right now, they get a pass. And she wants to crack down on rampant fraud in the for-profit charter school industry. All good ideas in my mind. On the other hand, Julio Rivera says no. He's the editorial director of Reactionary Times, columnist with Newsmax, The American Thinker, and townhall.com. ReactionaryTimes.com is the website. And Julio, your Twitter handle is, oh yeah, it's Julio. Julio, welcome back.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. First off, let me say, I'm sorry for your loss. Your friend John Conyers there. I'm sorry to hear that.
He was a good guy.
But let me... Yeah, obviously I didn't agree with him on a lot of things politically, but I'm sorry to hear that. I have to say this. I mean, I can see very clearly that this is just another attempt by Elizabeth Warren and the statists, of her ilk to try to grab a stranglehold on the education of our children. The fact of the matter is charter schools are important. Education choice is important. They're running this thing right now, the Common Core system previously and what's been going on with, the Department of Education, which I feel quite frankly should be abolished because it's being abused. You can't have unelected bureaucrats deciding what our children are going to learn on the federal level. Curriculums and the way our children are taught and the way that the education is run should be done on the local level. The people that are actually dealing with our children, I think, have a better idea of how to educate them. Yeah, now, you get this. This has become a racket with the curriculums and the textbooks.
Take a breath for a second here. You've just thrown out like 6 or 8 different things. Let's just start at the beginning. You said that Elizabeth Warren is a statist.
Yeah.
I agree. She is following in the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt. She believes that the government, when it does what the people want, can actually do good things. Now, the government hasn't done what the people want since the 1980s, and I blame the Supreme Court for that, making money into free speech. But, you know, and right now we know from the Gillens and Page study that the odds of what the bottom 90% of Americans want being passed into law are actually lower than the odds of random occurrence, whereas the odds of the top 10%'s desires getting passed into law are very high. So, yeah, you know, if we go back, you know, right now statism isn't working because the state has been captured by corporate interests. You called Warren, and me, by extension, statists. I would say that the position that you're taking, Julio, is a corporatist position, which, you know...
No, it's not a corporatist. It's an individual position. Listen, I don't want a centralized Washington, D.C. deciding what the children are taught. And I don't really necessarily think that the states are doing much of a better job either. Look what's going on in California right now, where they're trying to teach sex education to kindergartners and graphic.
No,
detail,
they're basically teaching kindergartners to look out for sexual abuse. But here, this is what Franklin Roosevelt said in 1938.
They're teaching them about sexual activity at an age where their maturity level is not where they can process.
Yeah. Julio, you're blowing this all out of proportion. Franklin Roosevelt said the first truth is, this is in his address to Congress in 1938, his State of the Union address. He said, the first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power. And that's the essence of our debate. What you know, you're taking the position that private companies should be, you know, running our schools, owning our schools, deciding what our children learn, and I'm taking the position that we, the people, should be making those decisions through our democratically elected representatives.
No, you're making the argument that the government should have total and complete, unrestrained control of the education
because the government is us. You're making the argument that should be in the hands of some corporation.
You believe that, don't you, Tom?
I do.
The fact of the matter is, listen, me as a parent, I have 2 children. I want to have the choice if I get my kid into a charter school, or if I can get tax breaks for educating my kid, either homeschooling my child or sending them to a private school.
Julio, I have no problem with any of that. Listen, I have 3 kids. One went to a private school, one was homeschooled, and one went to the public schools. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. What I'm saying is I don't want my tax dollars funding your private school. I don't want my tax dollars funding your Christian academy. I don't want my tax dollars funding, you know, your.
But what if it's the Christian academy? Or the school that you wind up sending your child to directly? Like, there needs to be serious reforms as far as what kind of tax credits individuals who want to send their child to a private school. Let's have serious
reforms like Elizabeth Warren is proposing that actually turn every public school into a world-class school. Well, you know, every other developed country in the world does this. Really? Why can't we do it in America?
Do you really believe that the government is capable of doing that, though, Tom?
Please name one country for me.
The government can't even run the DMV. They can't even make the post office profitable.
Name one country for me, neither of which are true. Name one country for me where private schools have supplanted public schools and it's worked out well.
I don't care what other countries are doing, quite frankly. I mean, I think that what we need to worry about
what you're suggesting doesn't work. Well, you know, we've been doing this experiment since Reagan, right? It was in the 1980s when they rolled out this whole "let's use tax dollars for private school" things with a lot of help from Jerry Falwell. You know, he wanted to start his own schools, and some of it goes back to the 50s when Virginia and Maryland, some counties in those 2 states, and one of the states, I forget which one, shut down their entire public school system for a year because they didn't want to have to integrate it after the Brown v. Board education decision. And that's what's largely been animating this whole private school thing ever since is, oh, my God, I don't want my kid going to school with minorities.
Being able to think, no, it has nothing to do with that.
But this experiment has failed. Our schools worked really well before Reagan came along and started doing this. We had great schools in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
We didn't have a Department of Education back then. That's what you're failing to see, Tom. All these big federal programs are designed to teach the children all the same thing, and it doesn't serve to make America better if everybody is learning the same thing. We have to have diversity. These charter schools all have different specialties, which wind up teaching these, for the professions of the future. I mean, how are we going to find our professionals?
If you want to send your kid to a private school that just teaches acting, go for it. But don't ask me for the tax money.
There's STEM schools. There's STEM schools out there. That way we teach our own kids to these professions. We don't have to keep importing these people.
If you think that it's not, if you want to send your kids
that Americans should have.
Julio, if you want to send your kids to a school where they teach science and math to the exclusion of social studies and anthropology and history, go for it. But don't ask me to pay for it.
Well, you know what?
I don't get why you're asking me to pay for your preferences.
I think that's a big part of the conversation.
Well,
I think your parents don't have the power to try to help their kids get the education that they want them to get.
Julio,
because the government wants to grab with both hands.
All Warren is saying is let's make our public schools world class. And if you want to have private schools, charter schools, or any other kind of school, pay for it yourself, damn it.
Let's make our public schools world class. What does that even mean, Tom?
It means bring them up to the standards of the rest of the world. Fully fund all of them. So if you live in a poor neighborhood, you don't have a crappy school. It's just that simple.
I mean, listen, the fact of the matter is there's some listen, I'll tell you like this. Where I went to school, there were 6 eighth grade classes. There were 216 kids in the 8th grade. When I went to high school, there were 3,000 kids in the school. You know how many kids were in my graduating class? Less than 700. We lost about 80% of the students from my freshman year to my senior year. Are the schools in the inner cities terrible? Yes, of course they are.
So
but
let's fix them.
You know why?
Because of the property tax. Because they're funded by property taxes.
Jersey took over. Let me tell you something, and I'm going to tell you something. This is a bombshell.
You got 5.
When I took my 8th grade California achievement test. Oh, come on. You're not going to let me get the
I had no choice, Julio. At 18 minutes after the hour, there's a hard break.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to write a column about this, and I'm going to point out this conversation because
cool. And I'll bring you back, and we can finish the conversation, another time. But Julio Rivera. Julio, thanks for dropping by. Yeah, good talking to you. It's Julio is his Twitter handle.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And he writes for reactionarytimes.com. Julio Rivera. We'll be right back. And welcome back. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and that we will be getting to, but this Franklin Roosevelt speech, this is just remarkable. It was his State of the Union address in 1938, and he said, unhappy events abroad have retaught us 2 simple truths about the liberty of a democratic people. The first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe. Now, keep in mind, this is 1938. This is 6 years after, or 5 years, I guess, after Hitler came to power. The first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to the point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power. That is the second sentence of the president's State of the Union address in 1938. Can you imagine a president today giving a State of the Union address that starts out that way? He continues, he says, the second truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if its business system does not provide employment and produce and distribute goods in such a way as to sustain an acceptable standard of living. In other words, living wage. Both lessons, FDR said, hit home. Among us today, now this was 1938. This was, 5 years into the New Deal. He was making really substantial progress. But what he was left over with was the Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover administrations, which were essentially, they did the same thing Reagan did, cut taxes, deregulate, all that kind of stuff. And it produced, a little mini Gilded Age. We refer to it as the Roaring '20s. So back to FDR's, address to Congress. He says, among us today, a concentration of private power without equal in history is growing. This concentration is seriously impairing the economic effectiveness of private enterprise as a way of providing employment for labor and capital, and as a way of assuring a more equitable distribution of income and earnings among the people of the nation as a whole. In other words, this concentration of private power is a threat to business itself as well. He says, we believe in a way of living in which political democracy and free private enterprise for profit should serve and protect each other to ensure a maximum of human liberty, not for a few, but for all. It has been well said that the freest government, if it could exist, would not be long acceptable if the tendency of the laws were to create a rapid accumulation of property in few hands and to render the great mass of the population dependent and penniless. Today, many Americans ask the uneasy question, FDR told Congress. Is the vociferation that our liberties are in danger justified by the facts? And then he goes through and he lays out the facts. He says, today's answer on the part of average men and women in every part of the country is far more accurate than it would have been in 1929. Their answer is that if there is a danger, it comes from that concentrated private economic power, which is struggling so hard to master our democratic government. It's remarkable. Anyhow, we'll be back, with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What do they call him? Fat Nixon? No, not Pat Nixon. That was Tricky Dick's wife. This is Fat Nixon. Also known. I guess that's a fat shaming joke. I won't say that anymore. But Orange Nixon. Let's call him Orange. Maybe that's an orange shaming joke. I don't know. In any case, Trump goes to the baseball game and gets booed. And then they start a chant of lock him up at 100 decibels. I mean, this is at the level of sound of a jet engine. He was not happy. Meanwhile, al-Baghdadi was killed. It's interesting, Trump has released this picture and talked about how he was there through the whole thing. They actually had to delay this by almost a month because he screwed everything up by pulling our troops out of Syria, or out of that, northern strip. Gary Kasparov tweets, surely Putin and Erdogan gave up al-Baghdadi in exchange for Trump abandoning northern Syria and the Kurds, a quid pro quo, I believe it is called. Either they gave him up or they simply declined to warn him this time. That's interesting. The Russian Foreign Ministry announced over the weekend that they were skeptical that al-Baghdadi had been killed, although the Russians were the first people that Trump thanked. But they said, no, we don't think he was killed. Why? Well, because on May 28th, 2017, Russia claimed that they had killed al-Baghdadi in an airstrike. A month later, he was killed in a Syrian artillery strike on June 11th. Then the leader of Iran on June 29th said he's definitely dead. And on July 11th of last year, of the year before last, this is all 2017, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights confirmed that al-Baghdadi was dead. So here you have the Russians killed him. 2 weeks later, or a week and a half later, the Syrians confirm that he's dead. 2 weeks later, the president of Iran confirms that he's dead. A week after that, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights confirms that he's dead. And then yesterday, Trump says that he killed him again. I'm a little confused. But, I'm inclined to believe our military, even though I don't believe our president. Pete Souza, the guy who was the photographer inside the White House throughout the Obama administration, his photographs are just absolutely iconic, reports that the photo on the camera. The metadata on the photo shows that the picture was taken at 5:05. Trump said it was taken at 3 o'clock, 3:30 when the raid was happening. Apparently it was posed afterwards. Very strange. And a former Pentagon official has just come right out and said it. Dana Stroul, former Pentagon official who's now a senior fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, said that the Kurdish-led Syrian the Syrian Democratic Forces spent 5 months working with the U.S. government to gather intelligence on Baghdadi's whereabouts. The operation was delayed for a full month by Turkey's military activity at the border and the subsequent incursion into Syria. Amazing. Anyhow, I also mentioned Trump got the lock him up chant in Washington, D.C. A, that's probably worthy of giving D.C. statehood. B, I think this actually is causing, if the world notices that when Donald Trump shows up at a ballpark, people yell, lock him up. A, maybe Trump is starting to realize that his little hand-picked crowds for his rallies don't reflect America. And number two, maybe the world is starting to realize that we are not all as crass and crazy as the maggots who show up at these rallies.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or as our president, for that matter. Greg Palast is going to drop by right after the break. We're going to be talking about California wildfires. Then I'll be picking up your phone calls. Stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling, The Persecution of an American Whistleblower. This is from the prologue. Where am I? How did I get here? Those are the kinds of thoughts you have when your ultimate nightmare comes true. It was January 26th, 2015, my second long day of waiting in a small, windowless, soundless conference room just outside the courtroom number 5 on the 4th floor of the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Over the past 2 weeks, I had been on trial, accused of violating the century-old Espionage Act. As an undercover officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, I'd been involved in Operation Merlin, a covert scheme to derail the Iranian effort to build a nuclear bomb by providing their scientists with fake, flawed blueprints for warheads channeled through a Russian scientist. Operation Merlin had ultimately backfired when the Iranian experts detected the fraud, as revealed in the book State of War by reporter James Risen. Agency leaders were furious, not at themselves for launching a risky and ill-conceived scheme, but at the author who dared to expose their incompetence. In their eagerness to punish someone for their embarrassment, they looked around for a scapegoat. They found me. A compliant U.S. attorney dutifully filed an indictment charging me with, quote, unlawful retention and unauthorized disclosure of national defense information, mail fraud, unauthorized conveyance of government property, and obstruction of justice, end quote. 9 criminal charges in all, based on the claim that I'd supposedly leaked classified information about Operation Merlin to James Risen. The truth is that I did not leak any classified information related to CIA operations to James Risen or to anyone else. But I am a whistleblower. I'd blown the whistle by suing the CIA for discriminating against me when I was an employee there. I'd also attempted to blow the whistle about the dangers of Operation Merlin, not by leaking, but by submitting my warnings to staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sadly, those warnings were ignored. I'd been forced to accept some disheartening truths, that neither blatant discrimination nor a dangerous operation related to weapons of mass destruction were matters of real concern to the powers that be at the agency or among the members of Congress charged with oversight of intelligence matters. Even before the trial had begun, I'd known that my prospects weren't good. The world had witnessed the cases of Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, John Kiriakou, and a series of other whistleblowers whose prosecution, some said persecution, had been pursued by President Barack Obama with an eagerness that almost suggested a personal vendetta. In the atmosphere created by these cases, the mere accusation of having leaked classified information was enough to automatically condemn someone. In refusing to plead guilty and instead insisting on my right to go to trial, I knew I was facing an uphill battle, but I could not and would not confess to something I did not do. During the trial, the government did not present a shred of hard evidence to validate the charges against me. Even Judge Leone Brinkman summarized the case against me as being based on, quote, very powerful circumstantial evidence, end quote, rather than on hard proof. But there was one incriminating fact about which there could be no doubt. The CIA had paraded a whole host of current and former agents in front of the jury, and I didn't look like any of them. I was a black man who dared to build a career serving my country as an officer of the CIA. The trial had lasted a week and a half. Now I was enduring the most excruciating part of the whole ordeal, waiting for a verdict. How the hell did it all come to this? I'd grown up as a true believer in the American dream. Work hard, do your duty, stand up for yourself. Those were the rules of the game, or so I'd been taught. I knew I'd done nothing wrong, and I knew that fighting against wrongs is what an American hero is supposed to do. That's all I knew how to do. That's why I was now clinging to hope and continuing to fight, unable to comprehend how defending my rights could somehow get me branded a traitor. Thankfully, I wasn't alone in that waiting room. My wife, Holly, and my attorneys, Ed McMahon and Barry J. Pollock, were there beside me. But having company isn't very comforting when you have no words to say to one another. Silence can be uncomfortable, and when it's forced, it can be absolutely nerve-wracking. All of them, especially Holly, had believed in me and fought for me, and I could tell that awaiting the jury's decision was almost as excruciating for them as it was for me. But for me, there was a sharper twist to this agonizing time of uncertainty. More than waiting to learn my fate, I was waiting to learn what my country thought of me. This was a question I'd wrestled with my entire life. The experience was often stressful, even painful. My entire life had been one of fighting against stereotypes, assumptions, and limitations placed on me because of the color of my skin, something that happened to me repeatedly in both white America and black America. The American dream I believed in and strove for wasn't a white American dream or a black American dream. It was simply my American dream. But to many of those around me, it must not have been the right American dream, because I kept getting into trouble through no intention of my own. That, in a nutshell, is the story of the events that brought me to this room. My years of struggling to find a place in American society where I could be accepted for who I am. My battle to be recognized as a worthy member of the CIA. My shadowy conflict with people within the agency who, for some reason, were unwilling to accept me as part of their team. Unwanted Spy by Jeffrey Sterling. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is our old buddy Greg Palast, investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, the best democracy money could buy. GregPalast.com is the website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast, just like I'm Thom_Hartmann. Greg, welcome back.
Glad to be with you, Tom.
So I was just debating with Julio the privatization of public schools, and, segueing out of that, you and I were talking over the weekend about the privatization of public power. And I'm talking about electricity when I say power. And what PG&E is up to and how it's actually killing people and has killed a whole bunch of people. And then San Francisco said, well, we'll buy PG&E's San Francisco infrastructure and, pay them a good penny for it. And PG&E said, screw you. Same thing happened to Portland, by the way, about a decade ago when it was Portland Gas and Electric here. And when Enron went down, this part of Enron got spun off. The city tried to buy it. They refused to sell it to the city. They said, we will not sell it to a nonprofit, to a city, period. How do they get away with that?
Here's how they get it. It's called greed, okay? If the banks make a killing, it's even more than the stockholders and the executives who are cash in on private utilities who have you by the bulbs. There's only one line that goes into your house. The idea that there can be a free market in electricity is a nutcase fantasy. And people should know, before I was an investigative reporter, I was an investigator and a specialist in crimes committed by power companies like PG&E.
Whoa.
And I brought racketeering cases on behalf of the Justice Department and several attorneys general. I worked at the California Utility Commission, by the way. And for a short time, I ran I was the executive director of the New York Science and Technology Commission, and there I wrote a law where we had a similar case on Long Island, New York, 3 million customers, the giant utility. It was out of control. It was killing people. Long Island Lighting, and it was killing people. The lights were out. The reliability was terrible. The investors were greedy, and the management was incompetent. And so we took over the company. We took this giant private company.
We being the state or the city or who?
The state. Okay, what happened is the state of New York created an authority which bought the utility, took over the utility on behalf of the consumers. I wrote that law. I was asked to write that law, which allowed the state to do it. And here's how we did it cheaply. San Francisco, forget buying the lines. That's expensive, and they're going to fight you in court. San Jose has a great idea for making PG&E this renegade, deadly utility. It's an academy for accidental arsonists. Yeah. It's got to go. It's in bankruptcy court. And so what we did was in Long Island, which you can do in California, we can do here now in California, is to make a hostile takeover, just like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, just like all the corporate raiders like Wilbur Ross. In fact, by the way, I brought in Wilbur Ross to help out in Long Island to take over this renegade power company and make a hostile tender offer for the company's stock, which a state can do, believe it or not, to protect its citizens. We did, and I coupled it. I also drafted a civil racketeering case against the company. A jury awarded us $4 billion. We bought the company for $1.
Wow.
Okay,
now,
and that's how you do it. Okay,
I don't know what a hostile takeover tender is, Greg. Can you?
Okay.
And I'm guessing probably a lot of people listening have no idea what you're talking about.
All right. If you didn't see the film Wall Street, basically PG&E stock is in the toilet. It's worth $5 a share and dropping. If you add up all the shares, it's less than $3 billion. So rather than buying their lines at high price, still being, you're literally still plugged into their crazy, dangerous system, you buy the whole shebang for less than $3 billion. Yeah, you just make a tender offer. You buy their stock out.
Is a tender offer where you go out to all the stockholders and say, hey, you're sitting on a PG&E, you've got 5,000 shares of PG&E, I'll buy it from you for a certain amount? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, right now it's $5 and it's burning down to zero, as the Wall Street Journal says. And
so if the state came in, if California came in and said, okay, because the PG&E's stock is held by individuals, by pension funds, by all kinds of things. If the state comes in and says PG&E's stock is $5 right now, we will buy any outstanding shares of PG&E stock. Anybody who wants to sell it to us, we'll buy it for $8 a share.
Right, and you couple that
bail out of your, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, you have to add a second hammer, and this is the second hammer that worked in Long Island. Again, I want to tell you, we took over this giant power company, which serves an area as bigger than San Francisco in population and size, and we cut the rates. We increased the liabilities. We turned the lights back on. We made it a safer system. And by the way, we shut down a dangerous nuclear plant, the Shoreham plant. Right now, PG&E, just so you know, is running the Diablo nuclear plant. And if you think that that's a safe idea with those bozos, I don't think so. Yeah. So we did it in Long Island by saying, yes, we're going to buy this, but we also filed charges against the company, a civil case, for the damage that they created and the lies that they told us. And if you're wondering about PG&E lies, let's put it this way. Currently, in Sonoma, there's the Big Kincaid fire. According to terrific investigative reporting by the Wall Street Journal, fire was caused by a snapped jumper cable on the Geyser electric line, which PG&E said 2 years ago they would fix. The fix would be done by April of this year. It's October, ladies and gentlemen, and it busted, and it set Sonoma County on fire. 93,000 people have just been evacuated from that fire. Wow. What you're describing. Charging Long Island Power with basically crimes.
That's happening right now with PG&E. I mean, you've got some of these families who had members killed in some of these fires, and homeowners and business. I mean, there's just a whole pile of lawsuits against PG&E. That's why they're declaring bankruptcy, to get out from underneath all those liabilities.
But what we need is the state itself,
right,
and the local governments to file massive fraud and racketeering cases. The evidence is screaming at you.
Right.
It's literally burning in front of your face of mass and greedy negligence. It's all about the reason they didn't fix the line is not just incompetence. It's a lot of money to fix your system to make it so it doesn't kill your customers. Remember they're in San Bruno. They burnt 8 people to death, and when their gas lines exploded. Again, I investigated that. That was negligence. They knew that they had a faulty pipeline inspection gauge. So it's a long history of PG&E cutting corners, saving money, burning you to death, blowing up your home.
And as a judge pointed out a couple of weeks ago, while they were doing this, they were funneling $4.5 billion to their shareholders as dividends, and they were paying their executives millions and millions of dollars, I mean, just huge bonuses and high pay and all this kind of stuff. Let's just turn this over to some good old-fashioned, bureaucrats who know how to run a power company. People who work for the state, who are not making, $30 million a year, but, have a good salary and a pension, and bring in the technocrats, the people who understand power, and have them do it right.
That's right. And, in fact, actually, the city of San Jose has said, let's make it a customer-owned utility, using the power company's own engineers who actually know what to do if they're given the okay by the management and they were given a budget.
Sure.
PG&E has no. So we have to take over this company, and we have the pattern from Long Island, New York, a multi-billion-dollar utility, which we took over for nuts. And that's the only way to save yourself from being burned
from being crisped
in your electric bills, if not physically.
There you go. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com, the website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. Greg, thanks a lot for dropping by.
You're the best, Tom. Thank you.
You too. Good talking with you, my friend. We'll be back with your calls right after this. It's 43 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with your calls and, a little more of the news of the day, too, and as we continue. By the way, Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be with us for the full hour right after this. And welcome back. Reginald in Houston, Texas, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Reginald, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you. Elizabeth Warren, she's right on point for that free education for all. And I think if we go, out of the war budget and that we could take out of that war spending budget for aircraft carriers and all that, we could do that. Now, you look at why, like Rivera and those individuals, they really are pushing charter schools. That's the new cash cow that's out here for individuals. Even Barack Obama, when he was in office, where he's making his money now, if you investigate it, he was into charter schools when he was in his administration. That's what his big dollar choice is going now. And what he did with Chicago, why he didn't push the public schools while they're deteriorating, and that's part of gentrification that's happening all throughout the United States as part of the charter school movement. Because when you put a charter school in and you let a public school die in order to create the charter school necessity by one deteriorating and making and saying that this is a necessity, while you do that, that deteriorates the community, and then also it helps with that, it creates that gentrification process, and that's part of what the charter school system is creating, and also is creating that gentrification problem. That's also making this situation way worse, at least the school-to-prison pipeline.
Yeah, and this is and Elizabeth Warren is explicitly pointing this out, in addition to calling for, debt-free college and all these other things. And the process is really simple, I was complaining about this back in the 80s. You come into, you have a poor school district. It's poor because the people who live there are low income, and therefore their property taxes are low because their homes are not worth that much. And therefore the amount of property tax that's going to the schools, you know, which is principally funding the schools, is low. So the schools are poorly performing, you know, class size is too large, all these kinds, all the problems that come with underfunded schools. So then these conservatives come along, and these billionaires, you know, Bill Gates and his buddies, and they funded that movie, you know, Waiting for Superman or whatever it was. And they come along and they say, oh, look at these schools aren't doing well in these poor neighborhoods. Let's bring the free market in. Let's bring in choice. People don't need choice. They need to fund their damn schools.
And you're right. And then once you defund them, in order for the charters to succeed, something else has to die. And they purposely let that die. And then they not only take over the schools, they take over the communities. And they don't. The Community Reinvestment Act with the banks don't go through there. They start redlining the area. They like they're doing here in Houston, the Third Ward that's right around the downtown. All of that's been taken over and creating charter schools. The school that I went to is about to die out. We had 250 black schools here in Texas, and now we only have 7 that was part of the original 250 during the segregated time. We only have 7 left. All the rest of them been closed and took over by charters.
Taken over by charters. So they weren't actually closed. They were acquired, essentially.
They were acquired by
hostile takeovers.
By charters, and then the communities go, and then you have the regentrification. They're pushed out, and then they end up being, caught up into that school to prison pipeline because they're not accepted in those charters.
There you go. Reginald, thank you very much. Spot on. We'll be right back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to talk about a rebuttal, I guess, to your guest, the top of the hour, Julio. Mm-hmm. He writes for, what do you call it, Reactionary Science?
ReactionaryTimes.com.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I get the reactionary part for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this is the problem I have with, and I don't know why he has to just shout, and it's this I have a right attitude, but in terms of charter schools, and this is pretty much, and you were getting to it, the same thing with all the alternatives that they want, the right wing wants, and this we were talking about with Greg Palast, the same theory exists with taking, public monies for private use.
Right.
So I started as a teacher. I started my teacher training in 1984. And I became a certified teacher in 1987. I was a big proponent of charter schools, what the idea originally was. But what the idea of a charter school is now is a combination of 2 failed ideas. Just quickly, what a charter school was supposed to be was a small program. It was usually within a school where they section off maybe one wing of the school, a few classrooms, with a few kids, and they would try out new ideas. And then they would try to translate those new techniques into the greater district or into the school and then into the greater district. The problem is that they didn't translate. They were dependent on size in the same way as I have a friend who's a research chemist, and he says, I do my research in a 500 milliliter flask, but this stuff that we're supposed to be producing goes in a 5,000-gallon reactor. It's not the same.
Right.
The dynamics are different. It's trying to like make a 500-gallon pot of gumbo, from your recipe that you're used to using in your kitchen. It doesn't turn out the same. And so what they went to in the 90s was, remember voucher schools, that I want my tax money and take it where I want to go. Right. But then when I was teaching in private schools here in the Seattle area, in the east side, my supervisor, our director said, no, we would not become a voucher school. And I said, well, why not? He said, because the vouchers wouldn't be enough to cover the tuition. So that idea failed too. So now they started going with, well, we should have all this choice because I have a kid in school And I want the money should follow the kid. You know, that whatever
Right.
$10,000 or $12,000 per year should follow the kid. And here's the thing that started to bother me is that they think that because they have kids in school, they should have all this choice. But I started thinking, well, look, I don't even have any kids, and I don't have any choice about paying my school taxes.
Right.
I can't even choose where to pay them.
Well, that's
So-
because we all benefit from public schools. But this choice canard is the one that they always trot out when they want to make private a public good. You know, whether it's utilities, whether it's schools, whether it's healthcare. I mean, you want to have a choice of health insurance companies. No, I don't. I want to have my damn health expenses paid for.
Right, but the choice thing is I'm getting to that's exactly true. But the choice that they want to have is, let's say, a private, a charter school that has 50 kids in it that meets in a church basement, and they have 4 or 5 teachers, and they have a great student ratio. But is that fair for them to take the public money to? In some of these places are successful, many of them are not. But should they be able to have that choice to have a 10-to-1 teacher ratio where the rest of the district at large has 30 or 35 kids in a class? Why is that their choice?
Right.
Why do they get that choice? And what I said about
With our tax dollars.
Yeah, that's right. And I was saying about, yes, I believe in paying for the public schools, but if you made it choice at the level of funding, in other words, let's say I could choose to pay my school taxes either to the public school district or to a charter school or to a private school, you wouldn't see these charter schools exist if people actually had to say, yeah, I want to give it to Acme Private School or Acme Charter School, because they're grabbing the funds. And what happens to these charter schools, just like many private schools, is they're resource poor, because the way it all works out is it's the fact that there are people paying taxes that don't have kids in the school, and that's how the school district parlays together enough money to make the programs that they have, computers and all the resources that they have. And every private school I've ever taught in is resource poor, and they think, no, I want to get this money for my choices. And what they're really doing is they don't want to. And the choice that they have is like everybody else. If you want to go to a private school, then go buy it. Go pay for it.
Yeah, that was what I was saying to Julio, is if you want your kids to go to a private school, pay for it yourself. One of my kids went to a private school. Louise and I paid for it ourselves. And, this was, 20 years ago, but that's how it should be. Paul, thank you very much. Michelle in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Just an aside note about baseball. Coke Industries has a large sponsor sign out in the middle of right field, so I guess they want to remind their benefactors that even they can't go to a sporting event in Washington, they have to let them know who's boss.
Yeah, I guess
so. Saw that the other night. But I wanted to talk also about the public education system. And our public education system was set up so that every student had equal opportunities for a good education. And if you privatize it and you start using vouchers, what's going to happen is the schools are going to have to pick winners and losers. They're going to have to base on academics. They'll have to base on who's the best sports player. And it's going to be a win versus lose.
Yeah.
And
that's already happening all over the country.
Sure, and the other thing that I would say, too, is this conservative argument is we need to reform schools so that kids in lower incomes can go to college. No, that's not the problem. The problem is higher education is so expensive that those kids don't have a chance. And if you want to look at higher education, it is the perfect example of why we do not need to do to high school and elementary education what was done to our higher education system.
Yeah, amen. Very, very well said. Michelle, thank you. Jim, and how do you pronounce your town there in New York, Jim?
Patchogue.
Patchogue, okay. What's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Thanks for having Greg Palast on. I'm a licensed electrician myself, and as I've been recovering from major surgery for the last several weeks at home, and I was hoping to get a chance to talk to you, and it all fits in right now. I was on my way over to the doctor to get my staples removed, and I got a call from the office saying that the power was out, and my appointment would have to be rescheduled. Very disconcerting, and I'm in a 10-level pain situation right now.
Ouch.
So I figured I'd give you a little laugh on the Long Island thing, because I've been around here a while. My family's been here many years. We originally had Lilco, Long Island Lighting Company, and they gobbled up a bunch of smaller companies. And then Greg was exactly right. They got greedy and started investing in uranium stocks and uranium mines and the Shore nuclear plant. And that was the beginning of their end. But so I just, on a lighter note, and I needed a little laugh, was LIPA was the follow-up. It was a state collective, but LIPA is actually an acronym for, actually it means, it's just shortened form for liposuction, and another way to take money out of us.
Yeah. And
PSE&G, which is the now current company, is an acronym for Park, Sleep, Eat, and Go Home. It's the same crowd.
Has it been reprivatized, Jim?
Yes. Yeah.
It's a private corporation now instead of being owned by the city?
They're from New Jersey, this outfit.
Oh, geez.
So what my biggest beef with them, and on a professional level, I deal with them all the time to get work in and out, but they've cut corners a lot. For years and years, they were notorious for keeping the budget up, spending money where they didn't have to spend it.
Right.
And an easy one to see is advertising. Well, when you're the only game in town, what do you need? Who are you advertising to?
Yeah.
But let's bring the savings back to us.
Yeah. So is there an effort? Is there an effort on Long Island to remunicipalize the or whatever the proper word is?
No,
the power company.
We've got so many other problems. We've got the highest taxes on the land here, and when that Ryan tax bill went through, our lovely representatives waited till the vote was done, and then they voted our way. But they did nothing to help us. So we're stuck. We've got people with $20,000 tax bills here on average for their property taxes.
Amazing. And you can only deduct $10,000 of it. Jim, thanks for the call. That's amazing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Whatever age or place in life's journey, collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Fascinating conversation about the Commons, a debate with Julio Rivera about public schools and whether they should all be privatized. Oh, my God. Greg Palast dropping by talking about his back in the day where they basically kicked a private for-profit company out of Long Island that was supplying power, saying that California should be doing the same things. So that was our first hour. Our second hour here, Congressman Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. If you have questions for him, 202-808-9925. Congressman Khanna represents the 17th District of California, Silicon Valley area. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Khanna. Congressman, welcome back to the program, and thanks so much for being with us. I saw a piece that John Nichols did in The Nation about basically you and your perspective on the situation in Syria, and I'm curious your thoughts on that and also how that might tie into the killing of Mr. Baghdadi this last weekend.
Sure, Tom. Well, first of all, great to be back on. I was very concerned and remain concerned in the way we pulled out of Syria. I mean, I was for a responsible withdrawal of our troops. I thought our presence there hadn't been constitutionally authorized. But you don't just intervene and then leave with no regard for the Kurdish population or the civilian population there. We could have gotten a deal with Erdogan had we tried. We didn't try. The fact that we sent Pence and Pompeo after our withdrawal says everything about the effort that was made. There was absolutely no regard for the Kurds who had fought with us or the humanitarian or possibly providing humanitarian aid there. And so my view was that a withdrawal had to be responsible with an obligation to our Kurdish allies. And look, I mean, I'm glad we got Baghdadi. I give credit to our troops. But now Trump's saying that he wants to keep troops in Syria to protect the oil fields. It shows that there's no coherence to the policy.
Well, isn't the major sales pitch that ISIS was making and al-Qaeda before that we were just coming to steal their natural resources? I mean, in 1998, Osama bin Laden was quoted in the New York Times as saying that he was contemplating striking the United States for two reasons. One, we had an Air Force base that Bush's father, Bush the Elder, had put in Saudi Arabia to stage the first Iraq war. We had an Air Force base there where American soldiers were drinking alcohol and watching pornography, and women were driving cars and showing their elbows. And number two, that we were exploiting, we were buying oil from Saudi Arabia for less than $100 a barrel, which is what he thought it should be priced at, and therefore we were basically stealing their oil. That America is trying to steal our oil meme was the main thing that animated al-Qaeda up to 9/11, after 9/11, and that ISIS has been waving around saying, you know, these guys just came here to steal our oil. And then Trump goes on TV last week and says, yeah, we're going to take their oil, and I'm going to decide what to do with it. I mean, isn't this just playing into their hands?
It is playing into their hands. I mean, on the one hand, the president's saying, okay, I want to withdraw our troops from the Middle East, not get us into these endless wars. He's got Democrats in Congress saying, okay, let's do that. Let's do it responsibly. And then the same breath in which he's announcing Baghdadi's killing, he's saying, well, we're going to have our troops there to monitor the Syrian oil fields and try to get oil out of the Middle East, which is not even necessary in America's interests anymore. I mean, we're not dependent on that oil. So I think this is why the policy is completely incoherent.
Yeah, I mean, I get trying to prevent ISIS from seizing an oil field and profiting off it. I get that. But saying we're going to take the oil, we're going to decide what to do with the spoils of war and all that kind of that seems nuts to me. Anyhow, shall we pick up some phone calls here?
Let's do it.
Okay, Rob in Mesa, Arizona. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you. Hey, my general question is on education and the Democrats not taking the lead. Now, Warren came out with a little bit on education, and I just think that it's time for a systematic restructuring of the whole industry. And by that, I mean, we should be basically having public schools year-round, go to a year-round situation. That way the teachers are working, the full, 24, working the full week, 2,000 hours a year. So we don't have to, because usually when you talk about teacher pay, you're not including the 3 months off they have every year.
Rob, what's your question for the congressman?
My question is, has anyone put together an overhaul, a structural overhaul of the public school system? And I'm talking about, supervisory level and all that, because I think it's so antiquated and it's top-heavy.
Got it. Okay.
The teachers are not paid well.
Rob, a lot of our candidates have. I mean, Bernie Sanders has spoken about how every teacher in this country needs to make at least $60,000, and he's spoken about the fundamental issue, in my view, that's affecting public education, and that's the lack of equity in funding. I mean, I went to public school in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It was a great public school. I got a great education. If you went to public school in certain parts of Philadelphia, you didn't get the same education because they didn't have the same tax base. And so what we need is to pay our teachers more. What we need is more equity in public education. What we need is an introduction of more computer science and STEM into our curriculum. And the Democrats believe in public education and are willing to fund it.
Joe in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I wanted to ask a question about why the Democrats aren't doing a much better job of narrating the impeachment story regarding Donald Trump. And what I mean is there's a strong narrative that the Democrats aren't putting together. And what it is that Trump conspired with Russia to mitigate in our elections. He paid Stormy Daniels hush money to his lawyer. He obstructed the investigations that were conducted by Mueller and that are being conducted by Congress. He has denied that Russia interfered with our election in spite of all the intelligence and congressional and Senate investigations saying otherwise. And then he has he illegally held back money appropriated to Ukraine in order to get them to make allegations about Biden and to claim there might be some fantasy computer in Ukraine that doesn't exist that somehow exonerates Russia from mitigating in our elections. Why can't the Democrats just state those things very clearly, the whole process?
Joe, I appreciate that. You gave a great summary. We're trying to do that. We try to make those points over and over again, and we've been hammering, in particular, the point about Ukraine and how he basically was forcing Zelensky to announce a public investigation against Biden. We've emphasized in the past the obstruction of justice, the fact that he was trying to conceal the Russian interference. The challenge is that there's an element of the Republican Party, Republican base, that does not want to hear the facts. But I take your suggestions constructively, and we'll try to continue to get that narrative out there.
I think the word cover-up needs to be used in every other sentence. I saw the guy who's the head of Adam Schiff this morning on TV.
Yeah.
And he was describing a cover-up. He was talking about how Trump was not allowing members of his administration to come and testify. That's a cover-up. And I kept yelling at the TV, just say cover-up, cover-up. Come on, this is a cover-up.
And I think it goes to partly what Joe was talking about. I mean, I think we can use simpler words. President admitted, president covered up, president, digging dirt, and sometimes we could get a little too
bribery,
nuanced.
shakedown. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with your congressman.
Congressman Khanna, I saw you on MSNBC over the weekend. I thought that was, how should I say, sitting in the green room must be interesting there. I guess I wanted to keep it short. First of all, let me just say I really am sorry to hear about John Conyers. Rest in peace. He was a very great man. I wish I could live that long. Let me see. What can Congress do to help shift the electrical grid from coal, fossil fuel, and nuclear power to renewable energy production at the local source? I mean, if I buy a solar panel for my house right now, apparently it was going to be fed to PG&E. I just want to keep the power in a bank system at my house. And in the future, up here, my friends in the Northern California, where I live, who are experiencing now for the third time, my sister lost her house in the Tubbs fire. They can't rebuild because can't get fire insurance. I want to put solar panels on the house, keep the batteries there, don't need the wires. I can't afford to bail PG&E out. PG&E and Southern California Edison both have large liabilities as far as nuclear power. San Onofre's closed. I was hoping that we could use something like what was in the 1930s, the Rural Electrification Fund, to help get the federal government.
Joe, we got to toss this to Congressman Khanna. That's your question? What can we do? Okay. I'm sorry. We're going to hit a break here in a minute. Congressman?
Joe, I appreciate the question. I mean, we should be extending the solar tax credit so people like you can be able to afford solar panels, and we need to have massive investment in solar farms. We need to encourage local renewable energy sources so people aren't just dependent on PG&E. The reality is we know exactly what we need to do. The question is this country willing to make the commitment and the investment to move towards solar and a renewable energy future?
Yeah, and that's really the question of the day, of our era. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. Oh, his website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in Representative, Ro, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A, Rep Ro Khanna. And welcome back. Lou, watching Free Speech TV in Pueblo, Colorado. Lou, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning. Hey, Ro, I'm a supporter. I appreciate everything you do as well as Tom. My comment has to do with, can we restructure the tax laws? When utilities were regulated monopolies, maintenance was an expense they could deduct. Today, it's an expense they can't deduct. All we need to do is change the tax laws to make this for hurricanes as well as fires.
Okay, your phone faded out a little bit there, Lou, but Congressman, I would be astonished if maintenance was a non-deductible expense to a for-profit corporation. Do you know anything about this?
Lou, I think it is an expense that you can deduct based on capital expenditure or depreciation, and then maintenance is something that you can deduct. I mean, let me tell you, the problem in the utilities in our home state, in my home state of California, you have PG&E that has been totally unregulated, that is going bankrupt to the point where they're having to turn off people's power. And I think they should have been a public utility and broken up probably years ago. And we need to encourage more local renewable energy sources, more municipal public utilities.
Okay. Skip in Seattle, listening on KBCS. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, Congressman and Tom, a longtime listener. I want to offer another take on this al-Baghdadi assassination. We take great pride in having a high road system of justice in this country. We thump on our chests about the right to confront our accusers, the right to vigorous defense, and a whole host of things that we think we're great about. And yet we tolerate vigilante justice through surrogates by our president. What's the difference between Trump and the guy he brags about taking out by somebody's hands other than his own? Who's the real criminal? Who's the real bully? Who's the real whimpering dog in a tunnel? It's our own president.
So your objection is to vigilante justice, Skip. Let's let the congressman respond.
Well, Skip, I disagree with you with your respect. I mean, I think al-Baghdadi was a terrible, terrible terrorist who was the head of ISIS, who was responsible for presiding over rape and violence. And there's no way that in foreign policy that you can afford terrorists the same kind of due process protections as you do within the United States. So I have no problem with the force, with the order to kill him, and I salute our troops for doing that.
What about Congressman? I'm curious your thoughts on. We have 30 seconds to the break here. I'm curious your thoughts on Trump doing his. You know, he died like a dog. He was, all that kind of stuff. Do you think
that is just gratuitous and is the type of rhetoric that makes us more vulnerable? I mean, it's one thing to take out a terrorist leader. It's another thing to try to gloat over it, which then becomes a recruitment tool for these terrorists. And that's the sad thing. I mean, here you are. You've ordered an operation. The operation is successful. It takes out a terrorist. You could just be, precise about that. Instead, you're talking about Americans, troops taking over oil fields. You're talking about how this person died with a dog. I mean, even when there is something successful on his watch, he can't help but make a mockery of it.
Yeah, he's so crass. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So check it out at thomhartmann.com. Congressman Ro Khanna on the line taking your calls. And Lamont in Indianapolis, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Tom and Congressman. The question that I have is that I'm here in Indiana, and I've seen ads being run by Donald Trump for 2020. Why isn't the Democratic Party, and maybe you can get it back to them, running ads against him already? Even though we don't have a nominee, you have enough information and clips and Twitters and quotes and everything about all the stuff he's lied about. You know, you guys can run, where he said he didn't know anything about the payments and where he admitted to it. Is there any way you can relay that to your fellow Democrats, progressives, that they need to start putting out ads across the country? Because I have no problem with any of our nominees, maybe except one. But any one of them I would take over him, except maybe that one. And you guys should be running ads against him in general.
Thank you, Lamont.
Well, Lamont, I agree with you that we need to be campaigning against him. The problem is resources. I mean, right now the president has a huge advantage. Almost every incumbent president does, but this president particularly, he's got over $100 million war chest. Our DNC, Democratic National Committee, doesn't have that kind of resources, and the candidates are just using their resources limited to win the nomination. This is why, as soon as we do have a nominee, we need to do everything possible to unite behind them and get them the resources that they need to be able to do exactly what you're saying.
Tom in Boulder, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hello, gentlemen. I have a question that I hope you can give me some insight to in my lifetime. Do we have any chance of doing away with daylight savings time? Ever.
You're singing my song, Tom. Congressman?
Tom, my wife, I'm kidding you not, she just asked me the same question this weekend, and she said, you guys can't do anything in Congress. Can't you just get rid of the daylight savings? I mean, can you not even do that or something? So, I'm actually on a bill that would get rid of it. Tom, I don't know if I couldn't answer this question, but what was the rationale originally for daylight savings? I don't know if you know.
It turned the rationale was that you'd have more. Part of the way it was sold was kids will be at less risk because they'll be going to school in the light instead of the dark, and workers will, there was something about workers. But it turns out there was a really great article about this last year in one of the, like the Atlantic or the New Yorker, in one of those magazines that does like long form, in-depth investigative reporting. And it turns out that the two guys who came up with this idea and pitched it to the politicians who put it into policy were avid golfers, and they wanted to have an extra hour on the golf course after work or before work or whatever it was. And it turns out that's why it was put into the law. So, and we know now from the research that people are actually dying because of it. I mean, every year there's a spike in car accident deaths and heart attacks in the 2 or 3 weeks that follows the change to and from daylight savings time.
And why is that? What's causing the?
Because you're having car accidents because people are sleepy because they're not sleeping the right hours. They're basically experiencing jet lag, and people who are who have a weak heart or who have metabolic disorders and things, your body it's the same dangers that are associated with jet lag basically.
Well, look, I'm on a bill that actually Marco Rubio has sponsored to eliminate it, and Kansan Chu in California is trying to eliminate it on a statewide basis. But from my perspective, I don't see the logic of why we have it. The question is, can it get more traction? It's been, we just need to educate more people in Congress to pay attention to the issue.
Yeah, I think so. And then step 2 would be to do what China has done, which is put the whole country on one time zone. Or get the entire world on one time zone, but that's a whole nother conversation. Congressman Ro Khanna with us for the hour, taking your calls. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls for the number 2 big cheese in the progressive congressional world right after this. Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold. Thom Hartmann Cruise will be sailing in July of 2020. The 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. .34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Mark, listening on our iHeart Radio affiliate, AM 910 in San Francisco. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, gentlemen. And thanks, Congressman Ro Khanna, for representing the people. My question is about messaging And how can the Democrats message that the Republican Party is the party of income inequality and their policies have led us to where we are now?
Mark, you're absolutely right, and I appreciate the simplicity with which you say that. I mean, the Republicans have given tax breaks to wealthy executives, to corporations. They've done nothing to help workers who have had stagnant wages for the last 40 years. Two-thirds of Americans make in a household less than $75,000. They're the ones who deserve a raise. The Democrats are fighting for them. The Republicans have been concerned with the very, very top. And I agree that that's the central difference between the parties.
Matt in Union, Kentucky. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. I was just wanting to know, the way the health care debate has been framed by the media, it almost sounds as though the Democrats are going to, as far as Medicare for all, they're going to take away your health care, but it's not the health care, it's the insurance. And I'm surprised that health care and insurance are even put in the same sentence, because the health care, you don't lose your health care, you lose the insurance. And I just don't understand why, like when the media, when they say that, well, unions negotiated for this great private health care, shouldn't they be saying private insurance instead of health care, and then frame it in a way so that people aren't afraid of losing their health care? Because losing their insurance, people at work lose their insurance all the time.
Well, Matt, actually, with Medicare for All, you don't lose anything. I agree with you completely. What you do is you gain more benefits. I mean, you're going to gain long-term care. You're going to gain vision. You're going to gain dental. You're going to be able to cover hearing aids. You have much less cost. You're going to be able to see more doctors, not just doctors in your network. And here's the thing with both Bernie Sanders' bill and other bills that have been written. You still, if after you get Medicare, if you still want more, you still can go buy private insurance. Nothing prohibits you from doing that. I mean, if you want to get plastic surgery, you want to get fancy private insurance. What we're telling people is we're going to give everyone basic health care in this country for lower cost and more benefits. And the media has distorted what the bill actually does.
I just, by the way, I just got a text message from the manager of our Chicago station, WCPT. He says, "Hi, Tom. Big day in Chicago. Thousands protesting Trump." I'll look into that during the break, and we'll update people on that. But I just wanted to toss it out. Rob in Henderson, Nevada. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. The one question I don't hear being talked about anymore is these lawbreakers that breach the security of the skiff should be charged with criminal crimes. If you or I did it, we'd be charged. Why are they getting away with this?
Rob, it's a violation of the House rules, and it may be a violation of federal law. I mean, I could never dream of taking in a phone to a classified setting, let alone recording things or tweeting things out. That is a clear, blatant violation of the law, and I have no doubt if Democrats were to do it, you would hear constantly on Fox News about how they should throw the books at us. So there is a double standard, and members of Congress shouldn't be above the law.
Kevin in Santa Fe, listening in New Mexico, listening on KTRC. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, Congressman and Tom, for taking my call and for all the work that you do. I wonder if you could shed any light on whether or not the beginning of the impeachment inquiry affects in any way Trump's pardon power, especially where it relates to any of the criminals in this vastly growing conspiracy.
Kevin, unfortunately, the case law so far suggests that the president's pardon power is fairly absolute. Now, that's never been tested, but presumably the president can pardon from federal crimes, not from state crimes, anyone that the president deems worthy of being pardoned. So you say, well, what is the check on the president? Well, the check is impeachment and removal. The problem is that you have a party, the Republican Party, that by and large has been unwilling to hold this president to account.
The Constitution says that the power of pardon is except in cases of impeachment. That phrase is at the very end of the sentence.
Okay. Well, then I stand corrected. If that's
well, I'm not. I just don't know if it's ever been adjudicated. If there's ever been. What does that mean? Does that mean he can't pardon, Paul Manafort, for example, because he might testify against him in an impeachment hearing, or does that mean he just can't pardon himself? I mean, it seems to me like we just don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's an open question, and certainly. One that we need to consider as the impeachment possibility becomes more and more real.
There you go. Mike, speaking of Chicago, Mike in Chicago, listening on WCPT. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. If he gets impeached, does he get to keep that campaign money, and does he get paid after office? And a quick comment on the Kurds. If the Kurds actually saved American lives by working with them. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, my understanding, Mike, is if he's impeached, he would get to still have his campaign money. I mean, you can't use that campaign money for personal use. But a lot of times when members of Congress leave, or even after our president leaves, you have campaign accounts, and that money can be used to support other candidates, or it can be used to donate to charity. In terms of whether he would still get a presidential stipend, I don't know the answer to that. I think Richard Nixon still probably got that after he had resigned, but I think that's a legal question. I just don't know. Tom, do you know?
I don't. And resignation may be different than impeachment, too. So yeah. I just don't know. Rob in Chico, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, guys. And I appreciate taking my call. I got a couple questions about Sanders-Bourne Medicare for All plan. And I ask it in the vein that I want doctors to be smart, well-paid people. I don't want them to become hedge fund managers. It's in that vein. Are doctors considered, will they be employees of the government, or will they be still independent contractors? And how are fees established? And does a doctor in San Francisco, is the fee for procedure X going to be more than a fee for some doctor in a tiny little town?
Rob, it's a great point, and this is an important clarification. Doctors are still going to be in the free market in private practice. I mean, no one is proposing a national health care system. You're still going to have private hospitals. You're still going to have private doctors. All that we're saying is that everyone is going to have health care given insurance through the government, like Medicare. So you have private doctors that see Medicare patients. In fact, if you talk to doctors, they are often thrilled to see Medicare patients because they know they don't have to fight to get that reimbursement. They get that reimbursement guaranteed, whereas often with private insurance companies, those doctors have to fight and they have to hire whole battalions of claims specialists to be able to be compensated. Now, we can debate and discuss what the Medicare reimbursement rate should be, and if you feel that doctors need to have more or hospitals need more resources, then you can raise or the Medicare reimbursement rates. But there is nothing that in the system is going to mean doctors have less possibility than in the private sector. What it's going to do is take out the excessive insurance costs, the excessive hospital facility fees, and, of course, if there are doctors that are overcharging, it will remove those excessive costs.
Joseph in New York City, listening on WBAI. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, good afternoon, fellas.
Okay.
I have a remark, but I really mean it as a question. I'm going to put it out that I think Pelosi is a very poor leader, and she picks terrible battlegrounds. The Americans care about obstruction of justice because they understand it. They don't understand the corruption in the Ukraine, and they don't care. She picks battlegrounds that really don't go anywhere. And why can't the Democrats really stay focused on much more important issues? Pelosi attacks AOC, she attacks Maxine Waters, but she's not a very effective fighter against Trump. And most people don't like her. More people don't like her. How could you get her back to what American people really understand, they really care about? You know, Ukraine's not a great...
Yeah. No, Joseph, you made your point. It's a good question. Thank you.
Well, Joseph, I respectfully disagree with you. My sense is most Americans do understand that you can't ask a foreign leader to dig up dirt on your political opponent. This is not about the intricacies of our foreign policy to Ukraine or what we're doing with Ukraine. This is about why is the President of the United States spending months trying to get another country to investigate Joe Biden and investigate Joe Biden's family. And in this country, we don't believe that you should criminalize politics and ask other leaders to go investigate your rivals. And so Pelosi's strategy has been to emphasize that. It's been effective. I mean, the polling shows that the majority of the American people now support impeachment.
And she certainly has had Trump crawling out of his skin a couple of times. I mean, she seems capable of freaking him out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd argue she's the only politician who successfully stood up to him.
Yeah, amen. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Khanna is a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of Congress of California in the U.S. Congress in the House of Representatives. And welcome back. Diana, watching Free Speech TV in Bloomfield, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I also want to ask this congressman why chronic pain patients are being persecuted, why pain is being treated and equated as addiction. Physical dependence is not the same thing.
Diana, I appreciate what you said, and I completely agree that chronic pain it should not be treated as an addiction. It should be treated as a disease, and it should be treated and covered under Medicare or covered by hospitals and doctors. And I'm happy to look into legislation that would address that.
Joan in Rochester, Minnesota, watching Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I just wondered whether you knew of any way that the Democrats could come up with a better way of handling the questions from the Republicans. I think when the Republicans ask the Democrats a question, they're always answering and trying to explain things. And I think their best offense, they should become offensive and say to the Trumps, if Trump says, what about Joe Biden's son, that the Democrats should say, what about your daughter Ivanka? And I think they should have a different kind of rhetoric, because it seems like the Republicans put them on guard and they answer their questions, and I don't think that's going to help them. I think they should have a good question back and put the onus on the Republicans so that type of rhetoric can be stopped. It's not helpful for anybody.
Congressman?
Well, Joan, I actually agree with you. In politics, they say if you're not on offense, you're losing. And I don't think we should be answering some of the Republicans' bogus questions. We need to be keeping the focus on the corruption in this administration, the president's abuse of his office, and not get into the weeds of answering Republicans' questions that are total distractions.
Mike in Las Cruces, New Mexico, watching Free Speech. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you so much, Tom and Congressman. You guys are awesome. Long story short, I know you're not. I don't have a lot of time, but
we have 1 minute. Mike.
I have it here. Medicare administrative costs, just like Social Security, who I used to work for. Medicare costs are 2%. That's your overhead. So why don't they, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, both hammer that point to the people? And who's going to beat that 2%? If people can look it up, Google it, whatever.
Great question. Let's let Congressman Khanna answer.
Mike, you're absolutely right. Look, Medicare for All is going to get rid of administrative costs, it's going to get rid of marketing costs, and it's going to allow for the bargaining that's going to lower costs. It's the only thing, not Medicare if you want it, not a public option. Medicare for All is the only thing that's going to reduce costs, and by reducing those costs, you're going to be able to provide health care for everyone and better benefits for seniors, including long-term care and dental. And Senator Sanders and Senator Warren will continue to make that point that other candidates are selling you a lie. You can't get to better coverage without lowering the cost than Medicare for All does.
Amen. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Democracy as well. So you can check out this new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's just available to people who are, members of, supporters of our program. Welcome back, Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls for the hour. And CJ in Bloomington, Minnesota, listening on AM 950. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you for letting me get in on this one. Thank you, Congressman and Tom. I was just calling to point out that when this weekend, when the president came on TV to announce about getting this guy who he just made a big to-do about, and it reminded me of the time when President Obama had gotten bin Laden, right? And when he got bin Laden, the difference was the Congress, the Republicans had shut the country down. So when the difference was they're trying to say that the Republicans didn't treat Obama bad, but when he got bin Laden, the country was shut down. And I think that the Democrats need to point that out.
Thank
well,
you,
CJ, I appreciate the point that Democrats have done everything we can to keep government running, and it's partly because we actually believe that government can be a force for good in people's lives and providing health care and education and providing infrastructure. The Republicans want to disrupt government. They run on platforms to dismantle government. And so for them, shutting down government doesn't come at nearly the cost as it does for Democrats who believe in responsible governance.
Jay in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, hello, Congressman. My question is regarding the Real ID Act, which, from what I understand, is going into effect next October. And I wondered if there's any chance of repealing it because of the draconian measures that it makes people take just to fly locally from point A to point B within the United States.
Jay, I would have to look into the details of that, and I'm happy to have my staff look into it, or you could write to my office, and happy to give you a more comprehensive answer.
Vince in Hampton, Virginia. Vince, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I wanted to talk about branding. Gosh, I got all this noise here. I think we should brand this Ukraine scandal, much like the Republicans brand everything like Benghazi, Watergate. We haven't even named it yet. And I think Trump named it. And Democrats are just bad at this, but he named it. We should call it the perfect call. And the perfect call is his Benghazi. And we should do hashtag the perfect call. The perfect call is going to bring down Donald Trump. The perfect call shows how corrupt the Trump administration is and it's going to be the perfect call to get him out.
I think that's creative. I do agree with your broader point that we got to keep it simple. You know, Trump uses very simple words, witch hunt. He labels things, and Democrats sometimes we get too caught up. And you know, just like Tom was saying earlier in the show, call something a cover-up, label what the Ukraine scandal is, and we're trying to be more disciplined, keeping it simple, and getting the message out.
Tim in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, and thanks for taking the call. Congressman, why don't we just go back to the law of the 50s? That's when hospitals and health insurance companies were nonprofit.
Well, Tim, I think if you have a Medicare for all, you're going to lower hospital costs. I mean, there are a lot of hospitals that are technically nonprofits right now where CEOs are still making millions of dollars and that are basically operating as huge cash generators. So I don't think just having a nonprofit hospital is enough. What you need is bargaining power from the government to help lower the costs of the entire healthcare system, including hospital costs.
Robert in Santa Maria. We have a minute and a half to the end of the hour, by the way. Robert in Santa Maria, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Quick one, please.
Good morning, guys. California seems to be burning down as every year it does. And I'm wondering when we can finally get a set of fire planes like the 747s converted over to running on water and actually get 5 or 10 planes and make it rain and put a fire out in a day. This would help stop global warming, stop all the trash and pollution going down into the streams, into the oceans, stop people from dying, and people losing their houses.
Thank you, Robert.
Well, Robert, I'm open to other solutions in terms of more water to fight fires, but we've had systematic mismanagement in California where a lot of the brush hasn't been cleared that should have been cleared, that has led to the catastrophe. PG&E and some of the utilities have not invested in the smart grid, and that's led to the electrical outages. I would argue that we need to have the entire PG&E, instead of being bankrupt, become a public utility, break it up, and focus on having more municipal sources of utility. So there's a lot of things that need to change for the way California's electricity system works and their forest management has worked.
Congressman, thanks again so much for being with us today. It's great having you on.
Tom, it's always a great pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. Congressman Ro Khanna of the 17th District of California, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus's website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. We'll be right back. We've got some, let's see. Oh, yeah, Judd Legum is going to be here. This is going to get fascinating. Stick around. Facebook news? Really?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Our book in today, Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Judd Legum. He publishes a daily newsletter that I subscribe to, and it at least a couple of times a week. I read it every day, and at least a couple of times a week. It just like, wow. And you hear me quoting this all the time on the air here. Today's edition, I guess would be the word, was particularly interesting. It's popular.info is the website if you want to sign up for it. Judd, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
So there's something weird going on with our social media, and I don't get this whole thing. Facebook a couple of weeks ago shut down my personal account. I mean, it's just a personal account that I've had for like 15 years that I use to keep track of my family and friends. And that was weird, and there's no way to appeal it as far as I can tell. Everything I've tried, I had to upload my driver's license like 7 times and nothing. And the same thing happened over at DemocraticUnderground.com. They shut down my personal account. I don't get it. I don't know what's going on. And then you come out with this story about how, well, for example, who is this guy Joel Kaplan at Facebook?
Yeah, well, he's the head of all global public policy at Facebook. Very important person, basically in charge of the D.C. office of Facebook is the way to think about it. And really a long history as a Republican operative, worked in the George W. Bush administration, and people started to become aware of him when he showed up at the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, when Brett Kavanaugh came back to testify about his alleged sexual assault, and basically sat behind him, supporting him.
That's fascinating. And you didn't get into that so much in today's edition, but I was reading, don't recall where now, over the weekend, that when Zuckerberg was in town, he had a meeting with a whole bunch of Republicans. He was meeting with conservatives. He was not meeting with liberals. And suddenly the Republicans have started treating him very nicely. And then your piece today is about how this one particular, this right-wing crank, Ben Shapiro, who's been, on the fringe of that movement for a long, long time. He used to come on my program back, a decade ago and debate me, and now he's kind of moved on to bigger and better things, I guess. Has this website that has just taken Facebook by storm, using techniques that progressive sites have tried to use and have gotten kicked off the service for. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you referenced, there's a real courting of the right and the far right. Zuckerberg was actually invited a lot of these folks, including Ben Shapiro, to his home for dinner in California. And What my newsletter goes over today is just the extraordinary reach of this far-right site, the Daily Wire, on Facebook. I mean, each article is getting multiples of what an article from the New York Times or the Washington Post or really any other publication. And so what the newsletter lays out is they're able to do this through this network of sites, of large Facebook pages that appear to be independent media sites. You know, they're called conservative news or whatever. But they just keep pumping out articles from his website, which is called the Daily Wire. You're not supposed to be allowed to do this. Facebook has a name for it. It's called inauthentic coordinated behavior. And a lot of people have gotten their pages taken down for engaging in this kind of stuff, but Facebook is going to let this continue to go on.
Well, in fact, you had graphs here showing that this right-wing website that is trafficking in misogyny and hate, essentially, has a bigger reach than the New York Times, the Washington Post, Huffington Post. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, it has almost the same total reach, but what that graph does is looks on a per article basis, right? Mm-hmm. Because, New York Times has hundreds, if not thousands, of journalists churning out lots of original content. They've got, maybe a couple dozen people, mostly aggregating stuff, but on a per article basis, so they almost get as much reach in aggregate, but on a per article basis, whereas the New York Times might get 1,500 what they call engagement likes, shares, or comments for an article, the Daily Wire averages 15,000. So it's a huge difference, and it's a lot of it. There's a number of factors, but one of it is this network that they've established, and I think the broader point is that Facebook is kind of bending over backwards to cater to this section of the political debate, the far right, and really carving out exceptions to their rules to make sure that they're not interfering with them.
Do you think that might be because the only calls to break up Facebook or any of the big tech giants are coming from the left, or could that be or is there some other, or could it be that Zuckerberg is, another libertarian billionaire?
Well, we're a little bit in the realm of speculation, but I'll tell you what I think. I do think that first thing that you were talking about, the real fear that this company is going to be broken up. You've probably heard the leaked audio from the Facebook meeting where he describes Elizabeth Warren as an existential threat and says they would go to Matt to fight her if she became president.
Right, and she has said that she would break up the company, or at least make them let go of some of the other companies that they've acquired, like Instagram.
Right, exactly. Instagram and maybe WhatsApp. And so I think that my view is, and this is a somewhat informed opinion because I've talked to other former Facebook employees who agree with this as well, that they really think that their best chance to head this off is just by getting in good with the Republicans in Congress. And that means with the Republican media apparatus in general. Mm-hmm. And so that's the priority. And all the policies they make are kind of to serve that objective, but not necessarily, what actually makes sense or what might create a coherent social media platform. We saw that with their policy where politicians are allowed to lie in ads, and of course the person who's doing that the most, or really exclusively on the presidential level, is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now that I've been kicked off Facebook, at least personally, we still have a page for our show, but in any case, I started looking around. Is there an alternative? There used to be multiple social media companies. MySpace and Facebook, and I forget the names of them now. It's been a while, but it looks like Facebook really doesn't have any competition. Is that an accurate?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the platforms that would have been the biggest competition, Facebook bought both of them. So Instagram was growing very rapidly. And right now it has a somewhat different functionality than Facebook, or Facebook doesn't duplicate too much of the functionality, but it definitely could have, and it could have developed that way to be a competitor in that respect. And WhatsApp is another one. It's a messaging program, but it could have easily been adapted to take its place. So yeah, there's not a lot of alternatives, particularly because the scale is important, right? You want a place where most of the people you might be able to connect with, and there's not a lot of alternatives to that.
Right. Last question. This has to do with breaking up Facebook. When AT&T was broken up, the shareholder value was actually increased substantially. If you owned one share of AT&T stock, and then after the breakup you owned one share in each of the six or seven Baby Bells and Bell Labs, or the new company, the new research arm, you actually saw the value of your investment go up. The same thing happened with Standard Oil. When Standard Oil was broken into 27 companies, there was almost, within a 3-year period, more than a doubling of shareholder value. I think you could make the argument to Mark Zuckerberg personally that if Facebook were broken up into 5 or 6 smaller companies, and you still own all the stock in all those companies, you're going to see a dramatic increase in your own personal wealth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think certainly if you had more competition, you would see more innovation in the way that, the features that these platforms are rolling out. But either way, I think Zuckerberg will be fine. But yeah, I think that's very possible that he would do even better.
Yeah, I don't know what's motivating him here at this point. I mean, he's one of the richest men on the planet. He could easily, just take off. I mean, it's like, oh well. Anyway, Judd Legum, the website is popular.info, info, popular.info. Be sure to check it out and subscribe to this newsletter. It's free and it's amazing. Judd, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks so much.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 16 minutes past the hour. I'm trying to get a reporter out of Chicago to talk to us about what's going on there, these anti-Trump rallies. This is fascinating stuff. And welcome back. Mary in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Yes, hi, Tom. I have a couple questions on the Medicare for All. I'm 65 and I have my Medicare and I pay $134 a month for my Part B. Now, when it's Medicare for All, does that mean that goes away, or does everybody pay in? Well, it's all negotiable. I mean, everybody's paying in out of their payroll tax right now, but for example, the way that it works in Canada, it varies from province to province because their program is administered by the individual provinces, and then there's this umbrella, a national umbrella that kind of helps run the thing. But the rates vary from province to province. But basically, you pay $100 or $150 a month for your Medicare, just like you and I pay for our Medicare Part B, and then everything's paid for. End of discussion. It's just that simple. So yeah, and just like with Canada, most of the proposals are that a good chunk of the funding is going to come out of general tax revenue or out of payroll-specific taxes, but then also everybody pays a small amount every month for their own health insurance. So everybody, not just those that can afford it. That's everybody. Correct. Well, the way it works in Canada, and Bernie's plan does the same thing, and we'll see with what Elizabeth Warren comes up with, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't also do the same thing, is that there is means testing on that. In other words, if you are, let's say it's $100 a month is the average rate, okay? If you're in poverty, that $100 a month might go down to zero, or down to something closer to zero, $10 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, depending on what your income is. The goal is to make sure that everybody's covered, and perhaps there would be a point above the average, like there is with Medicare right now. If you make $500,000 a year or more on Medicare, you end up paying $500-600 a month for that Part B that other people are paying $200 a month for, or $150 a month.
So that's how
And
it
then
works.
I have a question on reimbursements.
Sure.
Being a medical biller for over 16 years, I got to see what Medicare paid my doctors versus what like Anthem did. If we had to rely on just what Medicare reimbursement, we wouldn't have made it.
Sure.
Because the reimbursements would not cover leases and buying of equipment. It wouldn't cover anything.
Right.
And then another concern that I have is...
Can I address that?
Certainly. I'm sorry.
Right now, between 20 and 30% of all of our healthcare dollars that run through the insurance companies are being sucked up by paying dividends to shareholders, paying multi-million-dollar salaries to executives, buying them new homes in Switzerland, literally, things like that. And the overhead for Medicare is 2%. The overhead for most of your for-profit companies is between 20 and 35%. So once we get that overhead down to 2%, that frees up a mind-boggling amount of cash that can be used to appropriately compensate doctors and hospitals.
Yeah. With the emphasis on can.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is that if you have a national system and you're not paying doctors enough that they can make a living, you're gonna see a physician strike, and you're going to have to pay it.
I'm concerned that people are not going to want to go into that industry and be doctors, which would result in
that is not what happens in other countries. When I lived in Germany, one of my best friends was a doctor. He made the equivalent of maybe $150,000 a year, as most doctors in Germany do. And he was like, I went into medicine for medicine. I didn't go into it to get rich. So if we get people out of medicine who just went into it to get rich, I'm happy with that. Mary, thanks for the call. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. And Linda in Auburn, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I just wanted to bring up a point. It's a hypothesis to identify the conflict. And that is, what about if the far right is related to patriarchal interests? And I wanted to say that the progressives have, we need to get, I believe, Jews on board, Buddhists on board with the idea that the Bible and Jesus has an egalitarian message. And I can tell you 4 key places that point to egalitarianism and
we've had those conversations before, but Linda, you're absolutely right. The patriarchy and the far right are the same thing. Abi in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Hey, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Going back to the PG&E discussion from the first hour, they have been shut, and I also want to point out that this isn't only PG&E, it's SoCal Edison, it's SDG&E, all these corporate power companies are doing it.
It's everywhere.
They're shutting off the power because they're afraid of having the liability for if one of their broken wires burns things down. But they're burning a lot of things down metaphorically by shutting the power off. They should be liable for, people are dying from this. They should be liable for all the food spoiled in people's refrigerators, all the food spoiled in supermarkets, every crash when a traffic light is out. There's
the loss of income to people who work from home
by them shutting off the power. What they should be doing is fixing their damn lines.
Yeah, I agree, and burying them. But they had to pay out $4.5 billion to their stockholders as dividends, and they just doubled the salary of the CEO. He's now making $3.5 million a year. It's
obscene.
Yeah, it really is. Abby, thanks a lot for the call. I'm totally with you. Alan in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. I want to congratulate you on a terrific talk show and program. I'm familiar with your books, and I just moved to Hillsboro about a year ago. I'm by profession an economic historian and social scientist, and my comment is on the problem of unequal access to the media on the part of the average citizen who needs to have his or her voice heard. You're doing a good job as a representative of us working class people. But I have some experiences myself with Facebook that I could share with you if you're interested.
I'd like to keep this kind of focused, Alan. Was there a particular question or comment that you wanted to make? It says here that you called about Medicare.
They asked me, you were talking about 7 different subjects, and the person who answered the phone asked me, and the last one that you were talking about was Medicare. So
I see. Okay. Alan, I appreciate your call. Thank you for your kind comments, and I look forward to a future conversation with you about history and economics. Those are great topics. Thank you very much. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I just want to give you my take on this al-Baghdadi raid and the situation in Syria, and really how farcical the whole thing is. Okay, Pete D'Souza, he was a photographer for the Reagan White House and the Obama White House.
Right.
He's claiming that the photo of Trump and surrounded by with Pence and the generals, he's claiming that it was there in the operations center was staged. Yeah, and this is important because look. Of course it was staged, all right? You saw a bunch of stern white male faces, okay, about to pull the trigger on a target that's really not even a target anymore. Baghdadi hasn't been running anything for years, all right? And as far as
yeah, that's right. He's diabetic. He's sick. He's been basically fleeing from place to place, bringing his wives from Iraq and all this other kind of stuff.
Right. Tom, I dealt with this for years, okay? I retired in 2012. People will say, Dave, what is your interest in any of this? You're retired. Well, my interest is when I left the Pentagon, all right, I was concerned about World War III, all right? And I kind of let that fade because I thought Obama had stabilized everything, but I am still fairly convinced we are on a path to World War III.
I think you're right.
That's a whole different topic, though. But one other thing I want to draw people's attention to, because it's my other main concern, is how Trump emphasized there were no civilian casualties. Look, there are always civilian casualties and unnecessary deaths.
Yeah.
All right? That's what we all have to keep in mind. That is the ill of war. That is the ill, the true problem.
There you go. Dave, thank you for the call. It's always good to hear from you. We'll be back. We'll continue our national town hall meeting here with your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con in conservative. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club, we're featuring The Inner Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. It's a new book. The subtitle is How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. This is in Chapter 6, The Misconception of Meritocracy, page 161. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London who became Foreign Secretary in Theresa May's Conservative government in 2016, was educated at Eton and Oxford. Giving the Margaret Thatcher lecture to a think tank in 2013, He articulated the view that economic equality will never be possible because some people are simply too stupid to catch up with the rest of society. Quote, whatever you may think of the value of IQ tests, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, he said. Comparing society to a box of cornflakes, he praised inequality for creating the conditions under which the brightest triumph. Quote, the harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top, end quote. Inequality, quote, is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Joneses that is, like greed, a valuable spur to economic activity. Whether or not Johnson is quite as clever a cornflake as he presumably likes to think, he certainly is not in command of the facts. Nobel Prize-winning economists, as well as the OECD and IMF, have shown how inequality, far from spurring on economic growth, leads to stagnation and instability. Social mobility is reduced where income inequality is greatest, and far from inspiring innovation, it turns out that there are actually slightly more patents granted per head of population in more equal countries. And as we've seen in the previous chapters, there's also the undeniable human cost of our fixation with keeping up with the Joneses. But Boris is far from alone in his misconceptions about the relationships between inequality and ability. The idea that people are naturally endowed with differences in ability, intelligence, or talent, and that those differences then determine how far up the social ladder they reach, is a powerful popular justification for social hierarchy. The presumption is that we live in a meritocracy in which the key to status is ability. We think of society as shaped like a pyramid. The supposition is that most people are near the bottom or only a little above it because the bulk of the population lack the special talents that we imagine people need to get to the top. The belief that differences in ability are the main influence on where people end up on the social ladder is so strong that we tend to judge everyone's personal worth, ability, and intelligence by their position in society. Nor is this confined simply to how we judge others. It also affects how people see themselves. Those at the top often believe that they're there because they are naturally endowed with plenty of the right stuff, just as many of those near the bottom think that their low status reflects a lack of ability. That picture, however, is not supported by the latest scientific evidence. First, research now shows that a very major part of what happens to people and where they end up is the result of totally unpredictable influences and occurrences amounting to pure luck. Second, aside from luck, the most important links that exist between ability and status operate in the opposite direction of that imagined by most people. Rather than different endowments of talents determining position in the hierarchy, it's much nearer the truth to say that position in the hierarchy determines abilities, interests, and talents. But let's address luck first. Whether or not we consider ourselves successful, most of us can probably look back across our own life histories and recognize the roles that luck and chance have played in getting us to where we are. We're perhaps lucky with schools or teachers, with the questions on an important exam, with some nameless person dealing with university applications, or we got on well with an interviewer when applying for a job. Perhaps a chance meeting was important, or perhaps an opportunity for promotion came up unexpectedly. Finding a life partner is just as important for our quality of life as our career or income, but we are far happier to acknowledge that chance and luck played a key role in meeting that person than we are in acknowledging luck's role in our career. No one minds mentioning the chance meeting, the circumstances that put you both at ease with each other, or the shared interest that might easily have gone unrecognized. The role of chance makes people's lives highly unpredictable. Although there are huge social class biases in social mobility, there are at the same time vast numbers of people moving up or down the social ladder in ways that even the most detailed analysis of parenting and ability fail to predict. Similarly, although there are differences of perhaps 10 years in the average life expectancy of upper and lower social classes, that explains very little of the individual differences in how long people live. Inevitably, some rich people will die young, and some people live in poverty to a great age. And as some public health mavericks used to say, even if you exercised, ate healthy, and didn't smoke, your most likely cause of death was still heart disease. In addition to all this, there may be a large element of chance in whatever our experiences, including subjective experiences, trigger the kind of epigenetic changes affecting subsequent development that we discussed in the last chapter. Just as the development of weather systems is sometimes said to be so chaotic it can be changed by the flapping of a butterfly's wings, So what amounts to chance events at the social or the cellular level are now thought to play a very substantial part in our lives. So much so, the scientists have worried that if random chance and luck are such important determinants of whether or not an individual becomes sick, gets good exam results, or has a good marriage, it becomes difficult to understand causal pathways at all and to do anything about preventing or remedying bad outcomes. The book, The Inner Level by Wilkinson and Pickett. So our science fact, as it were, this is fascinating. A new study published by researchers from the Mayo Clinic found that men who eat a lot of dairy products have an increased risk of prostate cancer. So if you ditch the cheese and milk for plant-based foods, apparently if you're a man anyway, it'll decrease your risk. Lead author John Shin, a Mayo Clinic oncologist, said in a press release, quote, "Our review highlighted a cause for concern with high consumption of dairy products. The findings also support a growing body of evidence on the potential benefits of plant-based diets." The American Cancer Society tells us that 1 out of every 9 American men will get prostate cancer. It's one of the most common in the United States, and it has the second highest mortality rate of all cancers for men. Another recent study, by the way, found that eating 3 servings of mushrooms every week was associated with a reduced risk of prostate cancer. The benefits of a plant-based diet, though, don't stop there. Giving up meat and dairy have been recently associated with a reduction in type 2 diabetes and a healthy gut. All kinds of cool and fascinating stuff out there. So, Wade in Marion, Kentucky. Hey, Wade, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, how you doing today?
Good.
I was curious. I don't get to watch your show a lot. I'm usually working, but I was curious what you thought about Bill Maher's critiques of the Democrats running for president as far as being too far to the left to be electable.
Louise and I watched that yesterday, and I think that saying they're too far to the left to be electable is not an accurate characterization of what Maher was saying. He was pointing out that some of them are taking positions that are just so outside the mainstream. It has nothing to do with left or right. I get it that Bernie is defending the right of everybody in a democracy to vote. That's what happens in Norway. Anders Breivik, the guy who murdered 70 kids in Norway, can vote. Everybody in Norway votes, even if they're in jail. So somebody asked Bernie, well, do you think everybody should be able to vote in the United States? He says, sure, yeah, why not? And so then they turned that into Bernie wants the Boston bomber to vote. But I get where he's coming from, and probably it wasn't the smartest thing to say, given the politics of the day. And in fact, Pete Buttigieg said, I wouldn't go that far. I think Pete has done a good job of putting his finger to the wind. He pointed out that Julian Castro had called for taxpayer-funded abortions, as I recall, or something like that, for trans women. Well, trans women don't get pregnant, so it's like, I think his points were well taken, and I take Bill Maher seriously. On the other hand, his constant embrace of a mythical middle for Democrats has me scratching my head, because if you look at all of the opinion polls, all the surveys, what you find is that the middle in America, what the vast majority of Americans want, is strengthening Social Security, a universal health care, however you get there, free education or low-cost education, college education, better schools, improved infrastructure. I mean, basically all the things that the so-called lefties are running on, and less involvement in politics by big corporations. So, I just, that's my take on it. Steve in Minuet, New York. Am I saying that right? Listening to WBAI?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Oh, yeah, that's Steve from Nanuet, New York.
Nanuet. Okay, great.
All right. Yeah, I'm still responding to that reading you gave, and it kind of fits with what I want to ask you. I'm very intrigued, and I'm very confused about why Hillary Clinton, in one of her ramblings, implied that Tulsi Gabbard is a tool of Russia. And the interesting thing is that Tulsi kind of impressed me as someone who's kind of grounded, solid, no histrionics, rational. She's a military person who was in Afghanistan and
right. She was
Iraq.
a medic over there. Yeah.
Yeah, and she campaigned for Bernie in 2016.
In fact, she left the leadership of the Democratic Party in order to endorse Bernie. I think there's a lot of integrity in that, and I don't believe that Tulsi has any connection to Russia or vice versa. The thing about Tulsi Gabbard that concerns me is her embrace of right-wing Hindu nationalism. She is a Hindu herself. Nothing wrong with that. But she's a supporter of Modi and organizations associated with him, and he's turning into, kind of a Hindu version of, I don't know what, a right-wing strongman. And that's probably the thing that is her Achilles heel in politics. And she shows up on Fox a lot and all that kind of thing. She takes some positions that I disagree with, but I think that's the most problematic thing right now. There's a good piece about this, I think, over at Talking Points Memo right now that you might want to check out. Steve, thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you. Dan in Kane, Pennsylvania. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Yes, sir. In reference to PG&E out in California, California has a lot of sun. I think if they started localizing the solar panels and stuff out there, they could do away with a lot of those high-tension lines.
Right. PG&E has a business model of centralized generation and long-line distribution of power. And that, now as the climate is changing and the forests are drying out in California as a result of, we're 6 years into a drought now. And of course, you get the Santa Ana winds and everything, and it breaks up these giant power lines, and they go down with giant sparks, and they start fires. And, that's happened time after time after time. PG&E is going to do everything they can to maintain that centralized generation and long line distribution, because it's how they make their profit. But if PG&E was taken over by the state, per our conversation in the first hour with Greg Palast, and the state was to say, hey, if you want solar power, we'll give you solar power. You don't have to worry. All these, and I think, you got a couple of million people now who've been exposed to blackouts. That PG&E is trying to diminish their liability. They're trying to prevent more of these fires, who are probably right now thinking, damn, if I had solar power, I'd be in good shape. So, Dan, I think your point is very, very well taken. Greg in Webster, South Dakota. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hi. I would just like to say, in regard to Medicare for All, the doctors, if they weren't saddled with millions of dollars in student loans, wouldn't have to make as much money in order to live the same life.
That's an excellent point. I have a friend who graduated from medical school maybe a decade ago with like $280,000, I think, in debt. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
When they mention other countries, they always cherry-pick things.
Yeah.
The conservatives do.
Yeah.
If you look holistically at the system in liberal countries where people are always more happy, the average citizen, doctors are not starving to death. There's no shortage of doctors. That's correct.
That's correct. That's absolutely right. And as I said to the caller earlier, who was concerned about, what if doctors don't get paid enough by this Medicare for All system? I would really be enthusiastic about a system that flushes out of the system the doctors who are just in it for the profit. I had surgery from a doctor that I know for a fact just went into it for the profit, because he told me that. And he told me how he picked the specialty where he knew that he was going to make at least $2 million a year. And he screwed up my surgery. And if we could flush out of this, and I nearly died as a result of it, if we could flush out of the system the doctors who went into medical school because they wanted to make millions of dollars, and replace them with doctors who went into medical school because they really love the idea of healing people and they want to have a good upper middle class life, I think that would be a better thing for the United States. Bruce in Cleveland, Ohio, listening to WGRN. Hey, Bruce, what's up?
I listened very closely to your interview with Alex Lawson on Thursdays, and I wanted to bring in some points that one point did not come up, and that is medical providers can pull out of an Advantage plan at any time. And we saw that happen big time. I'm actually from Columbus. In Columbus in 2017, the Ohio Health System, which is a conglomerate of doctors' practices and 2 or 3 hospitals, pulled out en masse from an Advantage plan. So you can sign up. Oh, yeah, they pulled out en masse.
Now, they can pull out of Medicare, too, though, can't they? Can't they just say we're not going to take Medicare patients anymore?
They could, but they're far less likely to.
Right.
Because they're not... I don't know why they pulled out, but I suspect it was because the Anthem plan was not giving them the prices they wanted or was screwing them in a way that
or probably it was, I mean, we had several callers when we did that show on Thursday who pointed out that they were on Medicare Advantage plans, which of course is privatized private health insurance sold under the Medicare label, but it's not real Medicare. It's actual private health insurance. And several of these people said that, you know, they needed a procedure or they needed
approval.
Yeah, and their doctors had to jump through all these hoops to get approval from their health insurance companies, whereas with Medicare, you don't need to do that. I mean, Medicare, basically, they have this schedule. They say, here's what we approve, here's what we, you know, and you take it or leave it, and doctors do it, and it works.
Yeah,
well,
another point I wanted to make, a question came out that a Medicare Advantage plan was advertising you could go to any doctor you want. Because things you said, I've been reading the Medicare and You 2020 manual. Turns out there's 5 different kinds of Advantage plans. HMOs, where you go to their doctors, you pay nothing, you go out of network, you pay everything. PPOs and PFFSs, you go to their preferred providers, they cover it or they cover most of it. You go to a non-preferred provider, they pay that doctor either what they pay the preferred provider or a lower percentage, and then you pay whatever the difference is out of your own pocket.
Right.
So
no, it's just like in the private health insurance market, and it's enormously profitable. It's why the CEO of United Healthcare made over $1 billion, because they had this deal with AARP and they sell these policies. So anyhow, Bruce, I need to move along. Thank you for the call, Joe in Seattle. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hello, thank you. I appreciate all the great stuff you do on immigration, and I wanted to invite you to perhaps highlight also some of the positive stuff that is going on in Central American countries where in a few cases social justice and democracy is really happening, and together with solidarity from folks up here, there are some really sustainable communities there that are going on, and one of those is New Dawn, Guatemala. We here in Seattle support a ex-refugee social justice-based community there, and because of the really progressive structure they have, plus our solidarity, people are not fleeing for the border, and there's a few other communities like that as well. So I'd like to just encourage you to check that out if you can.
Is there a website for that, Joe?
Yes, I do. NewDawnGuatemala.org.
Okay.
And there's a lot of information, and you could interview people from the community if you like, and it's a really positive example that I think we can build on.
NewDawnGuatemala.org. Joe, thanks a lot for the heads up on that. I was unaware of it, and I appreciate it. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 46 minutes, coming up on 47 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. No, we all need to get to work here. We've got a big project. We've got a lot of work to do to restore democracy in this country. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. David in Leadwood, Missouri. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Thank you for your program. You know, recently I got onto the Humana thing. I've got Medicaid and Medicare, and I got on the Humana thing, and it took 2 weeks for them to send me the paperwork, and then when I did, I found out now I will have to pay for hospital stays, $285.
Oh, so you're on a Medicare Advantage program?
No, I got on to I was on the Medicaid and Medicare, and I applied for the Humana supplement.
Oh, so this is the Medicare supplement? Supplemental insurance.
Yeah, and I found out it cost me a whole lot more. Some of my drugs weren't covered. But the thing was, I could sign up for this plan over the phone. But as soon as I got the paperwork 2 weeks later, I saw how I was getting screwed.
Oh, so somebody telemarketed you?
No, I contacted them.
You contacted them, huh?
Referred me.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it took them 2 weeks to send me the paperwork, and when I did get it, I got screwed. And you cannot sign off over the phone. You have to. Then you got to wait another 2 weeks, and then you got to fill out at least 6 forms to sign off of it.
To get out of these things.
And the other thing, too, I wanted to mention really quick, we used to tease the English about the condition of their teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Now people on Medicare and Medicaid that have no dental coverage, we are in worse shape than them. Myself, I've got veins going around my aorta that are swollen due to a different medical condition. But my teeth are so bad I can't choose. And I can't get just dentures because I have a cleft palate and a cleft lip with a hole in my mouth and the roof of my mouth. And so,
Yikes.
there are particular cases where dental implants are the only way you can go.
Yeah, and we really should cover dental in the United States. And Bernie's Medicare for All program covers vision, dental, mental health, and auditory hearing. And you would think in any country with, a good country, developed country, advanced country with a good healthcare system, that, those things would be covered. But, unfortunately,
I know a lot of the Democratic candidates are pushing for better dental care for the.
Well, it's part of your overall body. I mean, I don't get why an infection in your mouth is different from an infection on your hand.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
You're
Have
welcome.
a good week.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dave. And by the way, just a heads up, beware, attacks on Medicare for All from foe and friends are well orchestrated. This from the Daily Kos. Actually, it's a piece from The Hill. A new polling being done by a company that is associated with one particular Democratic candidate has found that Democrats are most swayed by the argument that a Medicare for All program would impose a heavy cost on taxpayers and threaten Medicare for senior citizens. The poll was conducted by Anzalone List Grove Research, and John Anzalone is the chief pollster, who is an associate of that company, is also the chief pollster and advisor to Joe Biden. So, expect to hear a lot of this. Medicare for All is going to hurt senior citizens, and it's going to raise your taxes. But that seems to be the thing that really scares people, at least according to their research. We'll be back. It's coming up on 9 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. You can't even investigate him, even if he commits murder. Anyway, we've got a video about a president who actually did get arrested for a crime and convicted of it. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. It's one of our listener-supported videos. Check it out. Tag you're in. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jordan in Saskatchewan, Canada. Hey, Jordan, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to talk about kind of our healthcare system here. I've heard you talk about it a lot and just give a a little bit more perspective on it, since this is the birthplace of Canada's national healthcare system. The one thing I would say in Saskatchewan, it may vary with some of the provinces, but we actually pay nothing. So I don't pay from the moment someone's born to the moment they die. You don't pay a penny out of your own pocket.
Really? There's no premium at all? Oh, that's interesting.
No premium whatsoever.
I know there is in some of the provinces. I've had people call from other in BC, for example. We've had several people call from BC and say that they have to pay a monthly fee.
And I believe it might be the case in Alberta as well, but here it's 100% nothing. So it all comes through our sales tax and a small percentage out of income tax, but the majority of it comes out of provincial sales tax we have.
Huh. How much is your sales tax?
I would say, so right now our provincial sales tax is 6%.
Fascinating. Okay.
So it's a 6% tax on virtually all goods purchased.
Right.
The one thing I would say, I heard a lot of people talk about, doctors get paid less or there's longer wait times. Mm-hmm. Just from experience, like my wife is a perioperative nurse, and a lot of nurses I know, in that system, they range between $80,000 and $120,000 a year, which I think is a fairly competitive rate for nurses.
That's what nurses make in the at the top of the food chain of nursing. That's what they make here in the United States.
And then doctors-wise, we know a lot of doctors since my wife works with them. And, we know doctors that make, I would say, averaging, like low-end family doctor would be $250 plus, whereas we know surgeons who bank anywhere from $2 to $4 million a year.
Wow.
So it's I don't see a large difference. And then one of the other benefits we have is it's a system where everyone's equal, right? So regardless of your financial wealth, everyone gets the exact same care. So essentially, if someone who was a millionaire went to the hospital, someone who, made $20,000 a year, there is no ability for that person who's a millionaire to get healthcare services prior to the person with less income. It's everyone's equal. Doesn't matter who you are, what your place in this world is. It's you show up at a hospital, you're in the exact same waiting line unless they, leave Canada to.
Well, and you can understand where that would offend some of these wealthy right-wingers.
It would, yeah.
I've got to have a bed with the rabble. Oh, my God. Yeah.
And then when it comes to wait times as well, like if it's an emergency, it's instantaneous. If it's something that has low importance, like say you need a meniscus surgery on your knee, maybe you're waiting 4 or 5 months. But again, it's the very
which is about what it is in the United States, generally, I would think. It depends on where you live. A friend of mine had to wait 1.5 years in New York City for back surgery. It was non-emergency, but it was,
Yeah, and here, same type of waits. If it's non-emergency, it all goes into, a lineup, right, of first come, first serve, essentially, but and all based on priority, right? If it's the more it's needed, the more you need. It's the same if you go to an emergency room. If you go in there needing stitches on your arm versus, if you're having a heart attack, of course, the heart attack instantaneously gets brought in, where the person needing stitches may wait a few extra hours.
Yeah, that's a normal part of triage or whatever it's called in ERs. So Jordan, we just have a few seconds left. How do people in Saskatchewan? Do you know anybody who is saying, "Hey, we hate our Medicare. We want to go back to private health insurance"?
I don't know of anyone who doesn't like their health insurance. You get the odd person who complains about the odd wait time, but for the most part, we all talk about how much fortunate we are to have our system as opposed to yours.
Good. Jordan, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and thank you for taking the time to call in. I appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, and we need to spread the word about good progressive news sources, as it were. Popular.info we had on earlier today, with GregPalast.com. Let your friends know about this program, and however you're hearing this program, odds are there's a whole lot of other great progressive programming there too. So spread the word, please. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.